Hello, I'm Hayden Bloomfield and welcome to the Benevolent Business Podcast. Firstly, if I can ask a massive favour, if you're new to the channel, please make sure to subscribe, like the video, comment your favourite parts. It will do so much to help the channel grow and help the podcast grow. And of course, by subscribing, you won't miss out. I'm having some incredible conversations with incredible people, just like this week's guest, Morgan Absher of the TwoHotTakes podcast.
You got to pick your battles. Like, do I want to share it on the podcast or do I want to potentially damage a relationship? So there's stuff that we've had to cut out. And then there's also stuff that I haven't cut out. And I've gotten angry phone calls from family members. Ooh, okay, that probably should have been a therapist conversation, not like a mental health dump on you, my best friend. It's a little convoluted now because we are like starting a business together as well. Learn from me and from the beginning, have agreements with people. It tested a lot of relationships in my life and it was not easy. I'm at the point now where I'm realizing what burnout is. I didn't have a life. Honestly, I feel like I'm just starting to see my friends again.
How come you said yes to coming on this podcast?
You're like the second person that even knows this. It's that embarrassing.
If you haven't heard of TwoHotTakes, then Where Have You Been is completely blown up on TikTok. The YouTube channel, Morgan started her YouTube channel less than 2 years ago, has got, I'm not even going to go into the figures because that's exactly what we get started with in the conversation. So let's dive straight in because no one wants to hear from me. You want to hear from Morgan because it is an incredible story, journey into the highs, the lows. And this is something that I really took from it is in my head of the expectation of what it was like growing this podcast, the reality was completely different. The reality and the challenges that Morgan faced in growing it and the stresses, the pressures that put on to grow such a channel, such a podcast so quickly. So let's find out exactly how that story went. Hello, Morgan. Welcome to Benevolent Business. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
This is amazing. As I said when we started, this is so surreal to be... Well, one, this is the thing I love about podcasting, just the fact that you're the other side of the world and we can just have a conversation here. But to intro, the host of TwoHotTakes, where I've made some notes and this just baffles me. 320,000 subs on YouTube with 30 million views, 141,000 Insta followers, 2.8 million TikTok followers with 61 million likes. With your first episode airing the 11th of February 2021.
Yeah, just over a year right now.
In this episode, I want to kind of go through your story, your journey, how this podcast all came to be. And hopefully this will be something like me as a listener, like wanting to be able to ask these questions and get to know the like background of how it all came to be. And hopefully for other listeners of your podcast, my podcast, it will be very interesting. So occupational therapist, you mentioned at the start, like you started TwoHotTakes because you were struggling to find work, but you had a full-time job, didn't? Because I'm pretty sure in like earlier episodes you mentioned being like full-time occupational therapist. So is that still the case, or you've stopped working?
I have stopped working as an OT. Podcast is my full-time job now. I am going to keep working like towards other goals I have as an OT. Like I want to get like sex therapist certified and like do pelvic floor training. So I'm still going to use OT, probably just in a different way than I expected. Like I had a conversation with my boyfriend, Justin, yesterday, and he was like, isn't it so funny? Like a year ago, you were talking about working for a nonprofit organization for 10 years so your student debt would be forgiven. And now you're not even working as an OT. I'm like, yeah, wow. Things really took a turn there.
They did. Like to like get an understanding of that. So occupational therapists, to people that don't know, is my understanding as someone that doesn't know, is you work in a hospital and it's to do with people that have had like severe traumas, like whether it's strokes or suffered some kind of physical impediment where they're now trying to get back and get used to their senses again and mobility. So you help them with that, is that right?
Yeah, so OT, there's so many different practice areas for it. I think the one a lot of people are familiar with is like with pediatrics for kids that have autism or Down syndrome or other learning or physical disabilities. But essentially, it's very similar to physical therapy. And we work on rehab, but it's in the context of like all of your activities. So say you had a stroke, because hospital and that form of rehab is also very popular. But say you had a stroke and all you want to do after is get back to cooking. So our treatment is going to be getting you back to cooking. So it's not just like a PT session where it's like, okay, get up, lift some weights, let's move. It's all in the context of how can we get you doing the things that are meaningful for you and actually are going to make a difference in your life.
So what did a like day in the life for you look like when you was an OT?
I would wake up, go to a hospital in downtown Los Angeles, clock in, get my patient list, which was typically anywhere from 6 to 8 patients for the day, review them, see about their past medical history, see what brought them in, and then kind of just go about either developing a treatment session for them if they'd already been evaluated, or kind of just go into the room and evaluate them, which, charts do a very bad job of giving you an image what a patient looks like. So it's kind of walking in blind and you just run the patient through the paces. So for me, you do a lot of neuro testing if it's a stroke patient, or just have them get up. And can you get up and put socks on? Okay, great. Let's walk to the bathroom. And while you're doing these functional tasks, I'm evaluating, okay, like how's cognition? How's motor? Are you moving safely? Are you going to need assistive devices? So it's just constantly what's A, B, C, D, E, and nothing ever goes according to plan. So
that's a little bit different to what I'd imagine is a day in the life now. Like, I'm imagining it's wake up, find the computer, either edit or upload or edit or plan out who you're going to have as guests on and such, and spend a lot of time going through Reddit stories.
A lot of Reddit stories, a lot of emails these days. I don't move as much. That's one thing I do miss about the hospital. I was walking everywhere. I did laps, so I'm a little more sedentary these days.
But so going back to that, how did you get into becoming an OT in the first place? Because your background is growing up on like a farm, isn't it?
Yeah, so I grew up in northern Minnesota, a small town. I think the total population of when I graduated high school was 5,800 people. And there's a neighboring town that has about 100,000. So it's not super small. Like there's still stuff out there, but grew up in a small town, and I was the first person in my family to move out of it. So I went to Minneapolis, Minnesota for college. I worked as a medical scribe. I knew I wanted to do something in healthcare. I wanted to help people. So I started looking at career options. And my sister-in-law was going to PA school. So there was a heavy push to kind of check that out and see if that would be of interest. And so I worked as a medical scribe to start gaining some experience in the field, see what PAs do, see what doctors do. And while I was doing that, I realized I loved it. I loved working in a hospital, but I realized I did not want to be a PA or a doctor or anything on that line. I realized that they have way too much responsibility for people's lives, and that was a lot of pressure for me. So I did a couple odd jobs. I worked at Lululemon as just a retail associate. I became a nanny. I went on to be a flight attendant. So I was kind of dabbling in everything. But one of my sorority sisters from college became an OT. And so she was like, have you ever thought about OT? I was like, I don't even know what that is. Like, what? OT, what? And so I started shadowing a couple of different OTs, mostly pediatrics, and thought it was amazing. Thought it was directly helping people, but in a way where I didn't feel directly responsible for their lives. There was one case in the ER that really scarred me where a new PA was like left with a patient that the nurses that did the triage, where they kind of intake the patient, they categorized that patient wrong, and that patient went into respiratory arrest. And if the PA wouldn't have been as good as they were, the patient would have died in the room before, so after that, I was like, heck no, just give me OT where it's like you can do in a clinic and it's very chill. There's no medical needs really, which is funny that I ended up really liking the hospital setting because you do still have a lot of responsibility. And I had a patient code on me once, which was a little scary, but it's okay. We made it.
Wow. That's a lot of life. That's a lot of living in a very short space of time. It's a flight attendant, gone around the world, and then become an OT, work in a hospital, and then have had those experiences, which, wow, that's interesting.
It's crazy. It's crazy. I wake up every day and I'm like, how have I done this in such a short amount of time? I am only 28. And when I tell people that I've already done this, they're like, wait, what? Okay. But I think that does it lends a lot of insight for what I do too on the podcast. I feel like I kind of have been there, done that. I've made mistakes. I've lived and had these experiences. And so it does help lend to my opinions on the podcast.
Yeah. So talking of Two Hot Takes, how did that come into the mix of it? Because you've mentioned mentioned being a flight attendant and these different roles and then becoming an OT, being at college, that kind of thing. At no point did you say, I worked at this videography company, I worked for this audio company, I worked as a like nothing to do with podcasting, nothing to do with audio or visual, and yet somehow, so where did Two Hot Takes come from?
So I've been obsessed with Reddit since undergrad, I would say. I always looked at Reddit stories as a form of like a brain break or entertainment. So back when I was in OT school, that was kind of my step away from everything, my stress relief. I'd go on Reddit and read other people's crazy stories. So my brother started a podcast probably about a year before I did. And he is in business and wanted to just kind of talk about people's unique business stories. So he had kind of been doing that for a little bit before me. And so I was like, well, podcasting, if you want to do it, you should pick something that you're passionate about and aren't going to get sick talking about it nonstop. And so I felt the only thing in my life that was the case with was Reddit stories. And so April of 2020, I remember texting my friend Lauren and I was like, do you want to start a podcast with me? And I was just about to finish my doctorate degree. I graduated April 20 of 2020. And so I was just about to finish. I think I texted her this on the 19th, literally the night before I was officially done. And she was like, yeah, I don't know. I feel like we wouldn't have a lot of people that would like it or listen. I spent the next 6 months, 8 months. It was like pulling teeth. I was trying to convince any of my friends to do it with me because I didn't feel like I could carry it on my own. I was like, please just do this. I think it'll be great. It's going to go somewhere. Like, I think it's going to be good. Justin got so tired of me talking about this that he finally just bought me the equipment. And I got really lucky that my boyfriend is in music. He's a producer, artist, writer. So he knew about mics, had to do a little research about podcast interfaces, but it wasn't a big stretch for him. And so he bought everything. And then it was finally like, okay, Lauren, there's no excuse. Like, let's sit down and record an episode, see how it goes. And so we finally did in January of 2021. That was kind of the buildup for it. And things didn't go according to plan. We started and got a couple episodes in. And I think if you listen to our first episode, we kind of tee it up where it's supposed to be me and Lauren and like our show. And something we talked about before we started is when you do something like this and you put yourself out there on the internet, you open yourself up to the possibility of flack or people not agreeing with you or people criticizing you. And I think that was something she didn't really anticipate because she thought it was just going to be family and friends listening, if that. And so she realized it was too much for her and backed out. And so I was like, shit, okay, well, I'm invested at this point. I love it. I believe in it. It's my little baby. So I'm going to keep going. If you want to come on and, be a part of it, you can, but no pressure. I'll bring on regular guest co-hosts. And that's kind of how that transitioned. But that's Two Hot Takes and how it started.
That's amazing. I think the biggest thing there, the most refreshing thing is just hearing, just listening to it. You just think, oh, everything just went so well. You just had this idea. The next day you got a mic. The next day you recorded a conversation. The next day it was uploaded. And then suddenly a month later you got 1 million hits. It's nice to get the real story. And I think that will be a huge thing for anyone that's the whole point I want to share stories in this is people that have got ideas that want to build up and want to take inspiration how to have a benevolent impact. It's just hearing the fact that it isn't an easy pathway. You did have battles and you overcame them and there was struggles. Similar to probably me with starting this podcast, I resonate with that so much in terms of right, I've got this idea, it's going to be amazing. Who's going to do it with me? Someone? Anyone?
Crickets.
Yeah, that's amazing to hear that. And it was, obviously it's not good for you if it was grinding your teeth trying to find someone to work with, but it's just nice to know that we all experience that. You can overcome it and it can work well. So in understanding the whole side of podcasting, the audio, because it's not just you've got the podcast, but it's also a YouTube channel in its own respects. You've got the full length episodes and then you've got the short versions you cut up, and then it's TikTok where you're turning an hour-long conversation into 60-second snippets to make that really enticing, that's going to draw people's attention in. So where did that skill set come from?
So again, I got really lucky. I was a bit of a nerd in middle school. And I used to play this online horse game. You're the second person that even knows this. It's that embarrassing. But there was this online horse game. It was Equiverse and Horseland before Horseland sold their concept and became a kids' TV show. And so you would have to do a lot of Photoshop and editing to create these images for your horses and create their personas. So I already knew how to Photoshop. So YouTube thumbnails was super easy. But then Justin also came in where when he was living in New York and working as like a struggling musician, they would do video work on the side. So he was super familiar with Adobe Premiere. We sat down a couple weeks and we would edit side by side, and he really taught me the ins and outs of editing. And then from there, it just became me doing it all. Adobe is it's not fun. There's 10,000 ways to do one task on it, I've found. So there's a bit of a learning curve. Definitely something that anyone can do. So if anyone's out there listening, they're like, I don't even know where to begin. There's Adobe Premiere or there's Final Cut with Apple, and they're somewhat intuitive to where you can at least get the basics. And as your podcast grows and as you grow, it changes and your stuff will get better. I watched an old episode the other day and I was like, wow, okay, it's a little different now. A little different.
That's the best thing about having something that's content related, though, is that you have this portfolio then that you can look back on. That was a huge thing I had I have a company that I had like staff working for me, and got to a point where I had like 9 people, and then just one by one I lost everyone as we kind of like came back to normal and was coming out of the pandemic a bit, just for all different reasons, some my own fault, others whatever, but I just lost everyone to the point it was just me. And so I was at a point where I was like 4 years into a company and I was like, feel like I'm back at square one. I've got nothing to show for it. I've just got this stuff in my head, which again was why I like jumped on creating content, because as you said there, you started this podcast and now you're over a year in, you can look back and be like, oh, that's awful, but it's awful, but I can see where I've come. And so that was something that I had in my business where I was like, this is awful, I've lost all my staff, where have I? It's like, well, I'm back where I was. And I'm like, oh, if I had just started a YouTube channel instead, I'd be like, I'd have this platform, this portfolio of stuff, and I can see the improvements. And that's kind of like why I jumped on the opportunity to create content a bit. When you was obviously creating Two Hot Takes while working full time and doing all of this, learning all of this, so how did that work? I've tried to do stuff while doing stuff full time, and it's just like managing that and like knowing when to, like making sure that you've uploaded on YouTube, making sure you've uploaded on all podcast platforms, whether it's through like Anchor or something else, but then making sure you've edited the TikTok as well. And it's like, how did you keep on top of that? Or was it a struggle to keep on top of it while you were full-time as an OT as well?
Yeah, it was a real struggle. It was probably almost a month after we started, and like it was my birthday weekend, and I was procrastinating / like working full-time, and I just couldn't keep up with it all. So like literally it was on my birthday and I posted late, and I was like, sorry, it's late. Like, at least, it's my birthday, haha, like using that as an excuse. But like, no, it was because I was so busy. But I didn't have a life. Honestly, I feel like I'm just starting to see my friends again and kind of work on those relationships and be social and go out. But for probably the first year of this, I did not do anything else but this podcast. And I think I'm at the point now where I'm realizing what burnout is. And I'm kind of like, I have been a one girl circus, like doing all the editing, doing all the thumbnails, the TikTok cut downs, running all the social media accounts, answering all the emails, all this. So I'm finally to a point now where, okay, I'm ready to take on some help. But then now it's that balance of like, how much can I delegate? And then how much can I still take on while also kind of focusing on my self-care, my mental health, and all of my social relationships and stuff like that. So it's been a juggling act and hasn't been easy, but I kind of looked at it as, yeah, it sucks. I'm not probably the happiest I could be, but if I grind this out for the next year and it keeps growing like this and it keeps reaching people and keeps helping people, then it's worth it. And I'll get to a point where I can balance things a little better. So that's been my mindset for the past year. But I'm finally getting to a place where I feel like things are a little easier.
Thank you for sharing that. I think like that admission and that honesty is like the most important point of this conversation. Like there we go, we've done it. Like as cool. It's just like, wow, the honesty there. And I suppose it's something that you don't realize, like as someone that listens to your podcast like week in, week out, and I have an understanding of how much work it takes, but yeah, you forget like how much there really is that goes behind it. And it's wonderful to be able to get that understanding, that insight, and the fact that you're comfortable to share it. For me, it makes me appreciate the podcast even more so, knowing how much of a toll it can take for you personally. So, like, off from the questions I had, why, like, from listening to you now and hearing that, if I was like your friend in LA and you were like, I just got an email from someone in England was like, can you come on my podcast? If I was your friend in LA, I'd be like, no, you haven't got the time. Like, no, stop it. Ignore the email. Just go back to them and say you're busy. Like, so how come you said yes to coming on this podcast?
Your video made me cry. I think it's one of those things where, you know, looking at other creators, or just anyone, on social media, it glorifies everything. So it's kind of one of those things where the grass is always greener. And so for me, like, there has been a lot of stress in this, friendship troubles where, you know, friends that come on the podcast didn't feel they were appreciated. And so there was kind of a boycott for a while. So I felt like I didn't have any friends. And so there's been a lot of tears on this journey. And so seeing your video and other people kind of reacting to the content, or getting messages where the content has helped them and made their lives better, or saved them, or just impacted them, like you in your video, I was like, okay, wow, this makes all of that mud, all the sweat, the tears, whatever, it makes it worth it. And so your video, I shared it. I was like, this is so cute. I sat there, I'm crying, and Justin's like, why are you crying? I'm like, because it's so beautiful. And I'm an emotional person. I cry on the podcast all the time. So it's very clear I'm emotional, but it really resonated with me. And so I'm like, if there's a way like I can give back and help, you know, some other creator and have a really fun conversation at the same time, I'm like, I'm going to try to do it. I'm going to do it.
I feel like having a podcast can be therapy in itself. Just having conversations with people, and especially like strangers. When I like try and find guests and stuff, in my head, I'm like, I'm asking you to come on a podcast. That's like the coolest thing ever. Like if someone said, can you come on a podcast? I'm like, yeah. But then I was like, oh, actually, you have to be quite open and you have to share that with the world. Like if you say something, it's on the internet forever. And so it is quite a daunting, scary thing. And I think that's something that's just as content creators to content creators, or podcasters to podcasters, it's really wonderful to sit down and have a conversation together and just be able to be like, oh, isn't this aspect of the industry really crap? And you're like, yeah, it is. And it's like, oh, it feels nice to be able to say that. But equally, there's so many things that are amazing about it, and be able to like rejoice in how there's so many amazing aspects of it. Yeah, no, I love this. I love coming on, and then I don't have to do any of the work. I just sit here and have a good time. Yeah, I suppose I've never been asked on a podcast, but I can imagine, like, for me right now, I'm just like trying to make sure I time everything right. I flow the conversation well. I'm like trying to make sure I remember what my questions are, but not spend ages going, what's that question? And yeah, it's a lot of work. Like that's one thing I never realized as well, is when I started a podcast, I was like, you sit down, you have a cup of tea, you have a conversation, easy. And then I like hosted a conversation. I was like, whoa, like you're stressing out, you're sweating. You're like, have I asked the right question? Am I boring someone? I want to make sure they're entertained by this. I want to make sure they get value from it. I want to make sure I get value. I want to make sure anyone that listens to it gets value. Suddenly it's a lot of pressure. Oh yeah. I mean, I have my friends come on, and I think those are the easier episodes because it's like they know you. You can pause, you can cut whatever. But the guest episodes where, you know, you've never met them before and they come on and it's like, oh my God, like this is so nerve-wracking. And yeah, you want to be a good host and keep things running smoothly, and that's a lot of pressure. Oh yeah, and if something goes wrong, like if there's a technical difficulty, like normally it's like, oh, whatever, but if you've got someone there and you're talking, suddenly it's like, I'm unprofessional, I look like an idiot, I don't know what I'm doing. Yeah. Things on my podcast only go wrong when I have guests. That's just how it works. Oh, it would be. Of course, right? One thing you alluded to, which is one of the biggest questions I wanted to ask, was how has your relationships with friends evolved? Because when you have this idea, as you said, like drilling people into it, be like, come on, come like host this podcast with me. I can't do it all on my own. And then finally people are like, yeah, okay, we'll do it. It's something that you just sit, you have a conversation in the evening, you have like a drink or whatever, which for them it's, well, I don't know the dynamic of it, but they're having that conversation, sitting, chilling. Whereas for you, it's like getting everything planned out. Obviously there is that dialogue before of what stories you're going to discuss, but you're doing the editing and everything. And that's all fun and games while people are helping you out. But now the podcast has blown up to a point where you don't have to have a job because, well, I mean, in YouTubing and speaking to friends of mine that are YouTubers that I'm trying to get as many tips from as possible to grow a channel.
Yeah.
Like the number of subscribers they have and that they're targeting and being like, if I can get this many subscribers, I know that that's around about this many views, that's this much money. And it's like a tenth of what your channel's reached. Has that been an impact really for you and the relationship working with people at all?
Yeah, it created World War III in my life, I would say, because we didn't know what this was going to shape out to be. So I think initially coming on, you know, my friends were just doing it out of the kindness of their heart. It was fun. They'd come over, they'd sit down for an hour or two, have a glass of wine, leave. That was it for them. You know, when there was no money to be had, it was fine. But of course, things grow and things got monetized. And it was kind of this conversation of, well, why are we doing this for free now? And it was tough. It was, you know, there was a lot of feelings because I had been doing it by the time the conversation came up. I had already been doing it from February until December, totally on my own. And so then, you know, when they come in and they're like, well, you know, we want to keep doing what we're doing, but take a percent of everything. I was really hurt because I think in my head, I was going to make sure I compensated them when I could and make it fair. Obviously, you can't rely on that. And so I get also where they're coming from, but I was really, I think, hurt and just kind of, I felt a lot of, I think, resentment too, because I had been struggling for the past, you know, however many months and doing it all on my own. And I got to watch my friends go out on the weekends and still have a life and still connect with others. And I was sitting at home every weekend editing or like trying to come up with other ideas. And even like holidays, like we have Labor Day and Memorial Day in the States, and all of them went out and were having a great time. And of course, I see that on social media while I'm sitting in my studio office editing. And I'm like, okay, this is a shitty feeling. So then when those conversations happened, I think we were all frustrated. We were all trying to find what the balance was going to be in the new status quo because the podcast was in a different spot. And so things have been worked out now. I've now taught them how to edit. Lauren's episode, the first one of hers came out and was the malicious compliance episode. I still have to go through everything. Like they edit, but then I kind of like proof it. So it's less work, more work probably now, but it will be less work eventually. But it tested a lot of relationships in my life, and it was not easy.
I can imagine, like, especially as you said there, it's less work, but it's more work. I know exactly what you mean in terms of like starting a company, employing people, and being like, right, here's the job I do, here's what I'm delegating. I'm now going to get you to do that. But it means that I basically have to kind of hold hands and babysit for a while, go over everything, and gradually I don't have to like observe, I don't have to look over, I don't have to be involved so much. And then it like months down the line, it's like, okay, now it's saving me time. And especially like from a money aspect in terms of where you're saying like you've sacrificed holidays, socializing, being with friends, all these fun things because you've done all the upfront work and then suddenly the rewards are paying off, which again, like, I suppose I had it in a certain way in terms of like employing staff, and it was like a huge leap to take on this responsibility and pay wages. And like in my head, employing someone, knowing that I've got to pay that wage every month, give them a pension, all that kind of thing. I'm like, this is so big. Whereas to the employee, it's like, that's all you're paying me. And I'm like, oh my God, I've got to pay that at the end of the month. And it's like a year down the line and you're like taking on more and more staff. And I'm like, this is a lot of bills I'm paying out every month. And yet I've got staff that are kind of thinking, this is all we're getting paid. And it's like, I'm thinking in my head, like, give it a couple of years and I can like, I want a reward. I want to make sure everyone's valued, everyone's looked after. But it's like, we've got to get past this point. And it didn't work out so well for me. But I empathise with you there because it is a huge battle. But so in terms of that, I really want to get down to, for anyone listening, I'm sure a hugely valuable thing is, how do you overcome that? How do you avoid it being such a mental strain for you, for the creator, for anyone involved, for friends? Like if you was meeting yourself the day you started the podcast, what kind of advice, tips would you get to say, look, this is going to blow up, you're going to have this problem because it's going to monetize, but you can avoid a few issues if...
I know. Well, and so you always should think it's going to blow up. Like manifest that for yourself. Like always have that mentality. I actually tried to do agreements with them after a month, and it was pushed back and said, no, you know, Morgan, you're not there yet. Don't worry about it. We're coming on. Just, we're your friends. We're doing this for you. So don't worry about it. So I would say learn from me, and from the beginning, have agreements with people, whether that's friends, family, have agreements, have it so everyone has a clear understanding of this is my role, this is your role. It's not making anything right now. If that changes, you'll receive $100 for coming on an episode because that's what I can afford. And I think a lot of people, like hearing your story, your business was a startup. Startups, like if you're going to work for a startup, there's kind of this understanding where you're taking on the risk that you might not be paid what you'd be paid at a like configured company, a well-established business, but the reward could be exponentially higher. And so I think people just need to have that understanding of like, yeah, you could be doing this for free for a year. You could be coming on and we could be doing this show and all this work for free. But if it does take off, there's a huge reward potentially. I think just making sure everyone is on the same page from the start is like the best way to avoid any conflict and salvage and make sure your relationships aren't going to be, you know, tarnished or strained in any way.
Yeah, that's definitely something I agree with, because that's when I started this podcast, I was working with someone and I kind of had that same inkling of like, we haven't really got an agreement, but we don't know what it is. But we just ended up fading apart. It was a guy named Dave, and he has his own business and he just got way too busy with that. And it's like, that's his bread and butter and that pays him a living. Like, why would he spend time on this side hustle, this hobby, as much fun as it is? But so we just went our separate ways and never even got to the point of having an agreement. Like with my business, I just started on my own, 100% shareholder. Whereas I think I'd love the idea of being in business with people in the future, but that's, from day one. Well, I've got a thing at the moment that I'm hopefully moving into like property and stuff where I'm like, nope, day one, there's an agreement of like, here's what I own, here's what you own, here's the responsibilities, and here's who's accountable for what and everything, just so we're all on the same page. And I think that's a huge thing as well for just relationships in general, which, I mean, it's a bit weird if you have a friendship with someone and say, here's the friendship agreement. But in terms of, with my girlfriend, conveniently named Morgan as well, but with Morgan and me, that sounds really strange to say with Morgan and me. But anyway, with Morgan,
we get it.
We have the same thing where we essentially have like proper business meetings about our relationship where we'll go through like the last few months, like what have been the big problems here, what have we had arguments around, where did they stem from, why are they issues, and we'll like go out for like a lunch or something and sit in, like we did it recently in this little pub restaurant that had these like pod things. We just sat there in this little pod thing and just like went through loads of things that we had problems with, challenges with, and was like, okay, well, let's go through all of this, let's look at some really deep questions and analyze each other and see how we can like move forward and learn and grow from this, which seems way too obsessive and like strange, but it's a really cool thing to have. And I
love it.
Yeah,
I absolutely love that.
You like really get to know someone doing that, and it's really cool. I would advise it.
I know. Well, like check-ins like that are what, strengthen the relationship. And I actually listened to another podcast and I'm obsessed with it. It's NPR's Life Kit. And they actually had an episode about basically what you're talking about. It's about a love contract. And so they write a contract between the partners of like, what are your goals? What are your expectations? And then they do these check-ins and you can establish them, whether that's monthly, every other month, whatever, with your partner. But it sounds exactly what you're talking about. And it's super, super successful. Like these are the things that make relationships last. Is like that accountability, that constant like commitment towards each other and like communication. So it's not weird at all. I love that idea.
It's something that I spent years in business and like studying business and literally obsessing over business, where every waking moment was devoted to business. And when I kind of like, while a lot of things fell apart for me, it gave me so much time now to a point where I kind of work part-time and I spend a lot of my time like podcasting and painting. But it really, one thing I took away from all of that experience was how much of life would be improved if you treated it a bit more like a business, like with relationship agreements, relationship contracts, whatever they are, or even with your friends, just having catch-ups with your friends where you talk about what you want to achieve, what they want to achieve, how your friendship works, the dynamic of it, what are the boundaries that you set, like what can you talk about, what can you not talk about, what are you comfortable with. And if you had that within like every relationship. And when I see now problems, altercations occur between family, friends and whatnot, a lot of it's just lack of communication, which could be resolved with just some sort of, like, not contract, but some sort of formality of, here's a set of questions that we all discuss openly. Solved.
I know, it's so easy, but yet why don't we do it?
Oh, I know. I've completely lost track of where I was my questions, but these are, like, yeah, the best talking points. And I don't know if it's something that you and Justin, like, listening to your podcast and hearing you and Justin talk, it just sounds like there's so much empathy and so much understanding. And is it something that you and Justin have done or haven't done?
We haven't formally established it yet. It's a little convoluted now because we are, like, starting a business together as well. We're trying to start, like, a podcast network and take on other shows and help them grow, or kind of like mentor other shows and stuff like that. So we have a business together now too. So we spend a lot of time on the weekends editing and working on business stuff. And so we'll kind of sit back and we'll just, like, we have our little to-do list, our checklist, our notes together. And so we have these, like, unofficial conversations. But I think going forward, I'm, like, hearing this and I'm like, okay, I need to implement this now, because having a relationship with someone is hard enough, but then starting a business with your partner is another layer. So I'm like, I haven't started it yet, but hearing how well it's going for you, I'm going to start.
That's interesting. So how would you then manage? Because I think this is the biggest struggle. I get so much different advice. Like, when I've talked to people that are in business and stuff, just the advice around friends and partners in business, that it's very polarizing in terms of, there's people that are like, rule number one in business, never involve your missus, never involve your friends, never involve your family. Whereas you go to someone else, or you look at some of the most successful businesses in the world, they're like, someone I interviewed in my podcast for one of the earlier episodes of this season, he's got a company worth like 50 million. His wife's like head is a partner in the company. And it's like, well, clearly that rule, the person that told me not to involve my family doesn't even run a company. They work for someone, but they were just at a business event. So I'm like, it kind of seems like if there's good communication, not that there was or wasn't for this particular example of the guy that's got the successful company, but how then do you and Justin manage, or is it something that you've got to learn? How do you manage we're in business together up until like 5 o'clock and then we're a couple? Have you worked that out yet? I hope you're enjoying it so far. We've really got some incredible value from Morgan, and there's only more to come in the next half, so make sure to stick around. But first, this week's sponsor, which is, of course, a different episode from this series in the podcast. And I'm taking you back to a previous episode with my good friend Chris, who runs All Task Skate Shop, about his journey growing the shop, the unspoken reality of British skateboarding, the industry, ins and outs. So let's get a little snippet of that conversation.
Oh, I've just ordered like some of this stuff. Now it's turned up and it's bad. It was too easy, and I was like, wow, I just realised how much stress I have running this thing. This sounds stupid, but because I'm not trying to make money, what would I be scared of if at some point, if it doesn't work and everyone quits skateboarding, I'm still going to have all these skateboards. I'm still going to be stoked that I've done it.
It's a wonderful conversation. Make sure to check it out, and you can find it on the channel, whatever you're listening to, whether it's on YouTube or any podcast platforms. But otherwise, let's get back to the conversation with Morgan.
We really haven't. I think we're still, like, we just picked our name last night even. So we're in the beginning stages, I would say. But we definitely are, like, trying to establish those boundaries. I think it's hard because I feel like I constantly need to be on my phone or computer for work, and as a form of self-care need to establish, like, okay, after 8, you're done. After 6, you got to be done, or whatever that looks like. But I'm just kind of easing out of that year of, like, it's going to be nonstop work. And so we're in the testing phases of, like, testing the waters, finding out how it's going to work. It reminds me of, like, the stages of forming a group. Like, there's the forming, the storming, the norming, or whatever those stages are. And we're in the forming stage. Haven't quite got to the storming yet. And maybe we can avoid it with quality check-ins like this and communication. I think they're definitely, ideally in my head, I'd love to have, like, firm cutoffs where we designate a certain time where, okay, Sunday 1 to 4, we're going to work on our podcast network stuff, whatever that looks like. And then after that, like, let's go for a walk, reset, and then just have a good evening. So in an ideal world, that's how I would do it.
I love that you said about how you've, like, worked and worked and worked for the last year, and you're finally getting your time and you can have some some free time, personal time. You're like, now that I've got the free time, I'm starting a business.
Yeah, I know. We started another show. And so my dad's show, which is Father Knows Something. And so we started that. And it's kind of interesting, you know, hearing you talk, and at the beginning, you were kind of like, I started my show, what did you say, like a year before I started Two Hot Takes?
I can't even really remember, because I spent like 6 to 9 months just as same as you, just like trying to drill someone down, and then eventually, and so it was in 2020, because we recorded over Zoom purely for the fact that we couldn't do anything else, and that it was just like lockdown hit, and 2 things happened when lockdown hit. One, I was like, the stock market's just dropped, and I've been obsessing over Tesla for years, and I now need to buy some shares. 2, I was like, everyone's stuck at home with nothing to do, I need to start a podcast. And I can't remember, it was in 2020 at some point. But yeah, I started a podcast at that point.
Yeah. And so I think like Father Knows podcast, it's like me, Justin, and my dad. It's like our little baby, all of ours together. And so Justin is kind of in this boat where he looks at Two Hot Takes journey, and he's like, well, Father Knows, like, we're posting on TikTok, we're doing this, we're doing the same formula that you did, but why isn't it having the same results? And so I think no matter how much, like how established someone is or how much success they have, like it is hard to duplicate. Like I look at Two Hot Takes and I'm like, I got lucky. I really like, it's a good concept and it might be a good show, but like I also got extremely lucky, and it was just the perfect storm. And so I think no matter kind of where you're at, like Justin's got a music career, but yet he's trying to do this podcast. And like last night he's like, I don't know, like, are we investing our time in the right way? Like, is this worth it if it's growing this slow? And I'm like, yeah, it's still growing. And look at the updates you get from people. Like, you're helping people. This is reaching people and making a difference. So yeah, it's worth it, even if it grows a little slower. And so it's a struggle. Like, it's a struggle balancing everything and kind of determining, like, is this worth it or whatever. And so I think that's like kind of back to, you know, podcasts and why I picked Reddit. It's like you have to really love what you're doing, because if it takes you 2 years or 3 years before it hits, like you can't feel like it was a waste of time because you still loved doing it.
Yeah, exactly. And as you speak about luck, I think I'd agree. I think everyone would have to agree that luck has played a part. But as you said, you were working and working, constantly working, giving up a lot of social life in order to make this happen. But I think you had managed to tick a lot of the right boxes in terms of like regular material to keep the conversation going. You've got Reddit, like the world, everything is on Reddit, so you're never going to be short of material. You're talking about stuff that draw people, like going into the principles of like human psychology. When you are taking these episodes and then chucking them in, cutting them into little TikTok reels, you can quickly draw people's attention. As soon as you just say, am I the arsehole? You're like, arsehole. But as soon as you say that, someone scrolling through TikTok is like, what, why are they? Why are they not? So you have to see what it is. And that's literally how we discovered, my girlfriend and I, how we discovered you was just, Morgan was on one of many TikTok spirals just going through, and suddenly it's like, am I the arsehole? And it kept popping up. So then we was on a drive home from Cornwall, and she's like, oh, do you want to listen to this podcast I've been listening to? And seen like bits on TikTok, and I was like, oh, not really. Like, I've got a lot of good podcasts I listen to. Like, don't you want to listen to one of them? And she's like, oh, let's give it. And I'm like, okay, yeah, let's give it a go. Like, we've got a 6-hour drive. Let's give it a go. And then we listened to like one. I think it was like 2 or 3 episodes, and I was like, within the first episode, I'm like, this is amazing. Like, and I had to go back and like listen to every podcast episode from there on. But I think you did have a lot of luck, but you managed to tick a lot of the right boxes that, I suppose, I don't know if you was consciously aware of it in terms of like planning a podcast far ahead of going, like, you need regular material. As you said, you need to be passionate about it. But I suppose you'd thought about that, and it's worked really well.
Honestly, I had no idea what I was doing. That's probably going to make a lot of people feel better, but I didn't. It was, let's try it and see if it works. And okay, like it's worked, but now I'm like, how can I tweak it to make it better? So it's a lot of just trial and error and fake it till you make it.
I think that's just adulthood in general. Like I've had a lot of realization of that as being more and more adult recently, of just like, I thought in my head, I had a realization when I realized that when I was a child, people that I looked up to that I thought were, or people that were famous. So like, I just remember Busted were a famous band when I was a kid, and they seemed like adults. Whereas now, because I had my birthday the other week, and I was just like, I'm like years older than those guys were when they were famous, and I'm like, I ain't got a clue what I'm doing. And I've started asking people older than me, like, at what point do you go, I'm an adult and I have responsibilities and I'm a proper adult where I know what I'm doing? And everyone's like, I'm still waiting for that day. And I think that's the same with everything. Start a podcast, start a business, live a life. You're just kind of faking it every day.
Yeah. Well, and then there's like the imposter syndrome too, because like I think about myself in one way, and then like I hear you talk about like the podcast and like the success and how good it is, and I'm just like, okay, like I hear it, but I'm like, I still like it's not quite clicking. And that's imposter syndrome, or just kind of, I don't know, like feeling like, is this real, or like, am I an adult yet? Like, is this, I don't know. It's interesting.
So with that, like handling success, because it was in one of your recent episodes, it was something about like you being famous or whatever, and you're like, I'm not famous.
No.
When you have like millions of followers on TikTok, when you have a YouTube channel that's got hundreds of thousands of subscribers, it gets to a point where you kind of are a little bit famous, and it's like, is that starting to be a thought in your head where it's like, I'm going to be famous at some point, and if it carries on this way, I'm going to be famous. I'm living in LA. I won't be able to walk down and get a coffee without someone being like, it's you. Like, has that started to be a thought?
No, I've only been recognized probably like twice now, and most times it's for my voice and not how I actually look.
Oh, okay, that's handy having a podcast, because I suppose like I never watch the episodes. I always listen because I'm always on the go. So I suppose it's quite handy.
Yeah, I know. So I'm like, I'm okay if I never get to the point where I get recognized. Like, I'm friends with Drew Offawallo, and her and her sister have a show that is a part of our network now. And like hearing Drew's experience where Drew goes to Disneyland and gets mobbed, or she went out to breakfast the other day with, you know, her boyfriend, and like she walked by a table and everyone was like, oh my God. And like she got like mobbed. And it's like, I'm so fortunate, I think, where like I have a large following, but yet I don't have to deal with that. And like, I love connecting with people when I do meet them, but I can still kind of go about living my life flying under the radar a little bit. And I'm okay if that's like the projection or trajectory of like what I have to deal with.
When I think about that, I would never want to be in a position where like I go out for the day. I'm just like with my girlfriend, with my family, whatever it is, and just get bombarded by people. Have you heard of Stephen Bartlett? He has a podcast called Diary of a CEO.
No.
It's very famous podcast that's just like blowing up at the moment I suppose in the world, but in England. And he interviewed one of the guys from One Direction. And
okay.
I can't remember which one it was now. That's not handy. But
Harry, Liam.
It was the one he's got dark hair, short.
Oh, Zayn.
Liam? No, Liam. I want to say Liam.
Or Zayn. Zayn's got short dark hair.
It wasn't Zayn. It was.
Okay.
I think it was Liam. Anyway, the point of the conversation. So, like for Stephen Bartlett, he's kind of like he's got a large following, but it's to his niche. And then when he made friends with, let's go with Liam on One Direction, they went for dinner to a restaurant, and they're sitting in the restaurant having dinner, and they're having a conversation. But literally, it took not even half an hour, and that was it. Everyone in the restaurant recognised who it was. Suddenly they text all their friends. Suddenly the restaurant's bombarded and there's just a queue. And they're sitting there having dinner and there's just a queue. And it's like, it's no longer their dinner. Stephen Bartlett was telling the stories. Like, I literally just sat there while person after person came up to get a photo. And he was like completely chill, respectful to every fan. And he was like, how do you do this? Like, how? And he's sort of facing the facts that he's getting to a point now. Like, if he walks out his front door, the paparazzi are there waiting to take a photo. And he's like, I've really got to think about this now. Like, is this what I want? And I think, yeah, I can't imagine having that. And is that, well, you said you don't think about it, but have you thought about how you would kind of handle that?
No.
No.
I haven't. I would probably be the same way. I think it's hard because, like, you hear, you know, celebrities and you have people that are like, Keanu Reeves is the nicest guy, always down to take a picture. Like, he's so respectful. He won't even touch whoever he's taking a picture with. You always see his hand like hovering off their back. And then you hear other stories where it's like, oh, so-and-so was so rude, wouldn't take a picture, told us to F off. Like, so I don't want that. But like the dinner story where it's like, I just want to be able to enjoy my food, I think, before it gets cold. And then after, like, come say hi. So I just hope that if that were to happen, there's kind of like a mutual understanding of like when to approach and when not to. But I would never like brush anyone off. I would like to think I'm too nice for that, but it's hard. I can't even imagine having to navigate that on a daily basis.
Well, I suppose that's the problem as well with the limelight, is like, even when, like, something I've tried to do the last sort of couple of years is just, if you have any situations where you interact with someone and they seem to be quite offish, whether it's someone has road rage with you or someone gives you a funny look, whatever it is, it's just where before it would be a bit, you'd be antagonized by it or offended. I try and think like, for all I know, that person's having the worst day of their life, and I just walk past them right at that moment, and that's why they're the way you are. But when you're in the limelight, I suppose not everyone's thinking that way, but when you're in the limelight, you haven't got the ability to have a bad day. Like, as a normal person, you can have that bad day, scream and shout at some stranger and kind of be like, oh, I can't believe I've done that. But if you're famous, you make that mistake once and everywhere, which is a bit daunting, which is as well, like we were talking about like Elon Musk at the start of just, he can say one weird thing that doesn't really make sense or could be offensive to certain people, and but that's the headlines then for the next week. So that's for people that don't really pay attention, that's all the information they get, is that headline for like the next week. And that happens with, well, everyone that becomes famous, really.
Yeah, no, I think when you are in the limelight, you are kind of, people are less empathetic to like bad moments, or you're not afforded as much grace as someone else. So I think you kind of do have to really be on. And that's something like we kind of encountered recently. We took like a TwoHotTakes trip, and like Lauren and me kind of just had like a disagreement in the bathroom. And it was something like just kind of like, hey, this is a business trip. Like, let's just remember that. Like, it's not about us going out and having fun. Like, this is like kind of a networking thing and a business trip. And so someone, like one of the times I have actually been recognized, is someone came up to me after and was like, oh, like I watched your podcast. Like, I was in the bathroom with you guys. Haha. And I'm like, oh, fuck, you heard that? Like, that was a bad moment to hear for someone that actually like knows the show.
Yeah.
Like we're human. We're going to have these moments. And like, what's hard is like, we're all friends first and foremost. We do fight. We're not perfect friends. We're not perfect people. Like, we're real. We do fight. We do bicker. Like, one of us gets too drunk at the bar and one of us goes home crying. Like, shit happens. So it's kind of now putting in a perspective where we just have to like be more aware of ourselves and like how we navigate public situations like that.
So in terms of all of this, and obviously gaining that popularity, and like you alluded to earlier, especially with like pressures it puts on friendships, looking after your own mental health, as you said, like working and working and working, and then finally getting to a space where you can have time to yourself and start another business, but have some time. How are you looking after your mental health? Is it working? And there's now more money pressures, mental health pressures, as you said, and you, like on the show, you're a huge plugger of like therapy and stuff. So what is it that you found helps?
So I actually just started working out again. I love Pilates. I love like yoga and stuff like that. So I'm trying to get better about like carving out time where, okay, like book the class and show up and like you feel so much better after. So I'm really focusing on that. I do actually use Cerebral. Like, I talk about it obviously on podcast ads, and I actually have really liked that because of the fact it's convenient. There's kind of no excuse to like, oh, I don't have time today. Like, you just Zoom your little provider and it's 20 minutes and it just like it's a vent session, because Lauren and I, we're kind of both in the same boat where we've been like dealing with a little bit of the blues, and like we'll talk to each other and we kind of like look at each other after we say stuff and we're like, oh, okay, that probably should have been a therapist conversation, not like a mental health dump on like you, my best friend. And so we both like have that. So I think just kind of like carving out time for those like talk sessions for therapy. But I also have been like trying to get outside more and just like take regular walks, get sunlight, because that has such benefits. It's hard, but like just little moments too, like going across the street and getting a massage, getting your nails done. Self-care is kind of my outlet.
And that's something I've realized with a world or a career around creating content like podcasting, YouTubing. It involves a lot of being solitary, sat in a room on a computer, staring at a screen, and suddenly you're like, it's been 12 hours. I haven't spoken to anyone. I haven't seen any daylight. and my back hurts. As much fun as it is, as much as it's glorified, it's not the best thing for like self-care.
No, I literally sometimes I'll sit here and I'll talk out loud just to make sure like my voice still works, because I haven't like talked to anyone or said anything in so long. I'm like, wait, like, does it still work? Like, we good?
Yeah, that's something I do. Is like, that's part of the reason as well why I like making videos, is that I can just like ramble on and talk out loud. So even, and like when I am isolated, I often, always talking to myself. As you said there, like having conversations with your friends and being like, whoa, is this something that needs to be like for a therapist, or can we share this with friends? Having a podcast about Reddit stories where you go into real deeps of inner relationships and inner workings, have you found that being a barrier in itself, of like drawing the line of like, we're on a podcast here, and have you had to sort of be like, whoa, can we be that open and that deep about it? Because it's all fun and games while you're just having a chat over a glass of wine, or if you're uploading it as a podcast and 6 people listen. But if you've got hundreds of thousands of people listening every month, it's a bit different then.
Yeah, I think we kind of all tote a fine line of like, how much can we divulge and share about our personal lives. I think that's the perk about not doing live shows and doing like the pre-recorded podcast style stuff, because we can edit it out. Like, and I tell anyone that comes on, I'm like, if you say something, and you like in the moment you feel comfortable and you share something, but if after you change your mind, you're like, hey, can we cut that? I'm happy to cut it, because I want whoever's on, anyone to feel like comfortable. So there's stuff that we've had to cut out. And then there's also stuff that I haven't cut out. And I've gotten angry phone calls from family members. So you kind of learn the hard way. And it's a fine line of like, how much do I want to share? How honest and real do I want to be? But then respect them as well. Because at the same time, like, it is my life. It is my lived experience, my trauma, or whatever I've, dealt with, gone through. But like, you got to pick your battles. Like, do I want to share it on the podcast, or do I want to potentially damage a relationship? So it's a fine line.
Yeah, it's a very fine line. And the problem is it's often those moments that people would want to cut out are going to be the moments that people would resonate with the most, because it's the inner thoughts that we're kind of like having that inner discussion with ourselves of like, you can't say that, you can't think that. And then suddenly someone says it on a podcast, you're like, oh, they're human. That's what we're all thinking, that, not just me. Because there's like so many times I've been like listening along, and something will be said and I'm like, resonate with it so much, and I'm like, I definitely would not say that in public though. And I'm like, just like, shit, yeah, this goes out to so many people. And I'm like, I'm glad it does, but like, I just wonder what the dynamic will be like now, sitting down with like your family at dinner and be like, so we was talking about our favourite vibrators on the podcast today, what you guys been up to? And it's like, just eat your dinner.
I know. It's funny. Me and my mom love to torment my brothers too. And like, we'll talk about vibrators and sex positions. So that's not the relationship I had with my mom in high school. She was very, very strict. So it's hilarious to me that I have this now, and it's fun tormenting them. So my family's become, I think, very open. But yeah, there's certain experiences that they would appreciate that don't get put out there. But it's interesting because the reason Lauren and I became friends and like we even really like connected is because the first time we met in college, I went over to her like apartment with a mutual friend, and my biological dad called me, and I like look at the phone. I'm like, he only calls me because of one reason. He's probably drinking. And so I like kind of like broke down, had a moment, and like was really open and real about it with her. And she's like, that's the first time I've seen anyone be so open and honest with something. Like, I'm used to people just like pretending everything's fine, their life is perfect. And she's like, I knew you were a real one when you opened up like so much like that the first time I met you. And that's like the whole reason we became friends, is like sharing and being real and open. So it's crazy.
It's important to have friends that you can be that open with though. And that's like something, I don't even know where the thought came from, but something that I always had from as young as I can remember was just to be as open and honest as I can be with people, with the weird, the strange, whatever it is just be honest with people. Because if you're just open and honest and people still respect you and like you for it, at least you know that they like you for real. Whereas if you're just going to make stuff up and try and be like, oh, well, I can't be honest about it, so I'll just kind of pretend that I like this and pretend I don't like that to go along with the crowd. And then if it backfires and people don't like you for it, you'll be like, well, actually, I do like that, and suddenly it just creates so much complexity. And it's like, if you're just honest about things, at least it's easier for you, especially like internally, it's a lot easier.
Yeah, absolutely.
With your own relationship with the podcast, have you found it's changed now that it is such a big thing, or like is making money, has got such a big audience and is doing really well? There's been studies done on people that have passions doing them for free compared to when they get paid. And when they suddenly start making money from it, the love and the desire and the passion for it starts to diminish as they start making money from it. And is that something that you find, or do you love it the same way you did from day one, or is it a different kind of like love and passion with it?
Yeah, I still love it. I'm kind of at this like new baseline. So if like the baseline changed now, like that would probably make me sad. Like if it's monetized now and then stopped making money, it would obviously make me sad, but I still love it in the same way. I think for me in my head, I think there's just kind of like more of an added pressure now just to kind of like keep hitting those analytics or keep the listenership growing. So I think there's more of like constant like awareness of where things are at versus like, oh, it was purely just for fun, like whatever. But I still love it in the same way. I wouldn't say more so. Like I was obsessed with it, doing it for free, and you know, it was a free thing for 6 months, or 4 or 5. I'm bad with time, but I still love it in the same way. I think it just comes with like different expectations and pressure now.
Yeah, I can imagine. I can definitely imagine. One thing though that has been a huge takeaway, like listening to your podcast, and something that I've resonated well with is like I mentioned earlier about in business, working with friends, family, that kind of thing, and having people advise me against it or for it. One thing that I think your show has taught me is that despite it will have its challenges and have its ups and downs, but working with friends and family can be something really wonderful and really beautiful. And it's like in my own, as I alluded to, like something I'm looking at hopefully going into next involves in property is something that I'm hoping I can do with members of my family, that it means that it's people I trust, people I've known for years, and it's something that will be enjoyable. We all have different skills, but it means that I get to make money. I want to make money, but then if members of my family can make money as well, that's just brilliant, because it's people that are in my family, that are part of my tribe, whatever, that are coming up with me, which will be really nice. And I think your podcast has been a huge example of that, where I suppose there's a little bit of envy where you sit there and listen. It's like, oh, this is like friends sitting down having a conversation and just like having a great time. Yes, there's a lot of work behind it, but having a great time and then making money from it, it's just like the dream, which is incredible. One final question I always ask on the podcast, which there is something I would like to try afterwards if you are up for it. But one final question is, what is something that is in the world today that you hope will be eradicated within humanity in the future?
Oh my God, there's so much. So much. I mean, overall, big umbrella, like inequality, but that can mean so many things, whether that's, you know, income-based or like race-based. I think ideally, yeah, inequality. But something I see a lot, especially living in Los Angeles, is homelessness. I would love to see everyone have a safe, healthy living situation. If I'm picking one small thing, but there's so much. I think we've come a long way, but there's still so much we can do to make the world a better, fair, equal place for everyone. No,
it's a wonderful answer. And I always enjoy asking that question. When I started the podcast, I was always like, I want to have a final question I ask every guest. And I'm kind of like, it's just the more I ask it, the more I enjoy it. And it gets some really different answers from people. And I think that's the amazing thing, is just the various variation in answers I get from people. One final thing I was going to ask if we could do, I didn't even think about it until literally I had like finished painting an hour before you was available. And I was like, oh, I wonder if I can find a good Reddit story to discuss.
Yes, let's do it.
I was like, I don't know if you're going to be like, God, the last thing I want to do right now is what I do for a living. But I went on Reddit and I was like, can we discuss an Am I the Arsehole story on Reddit?
Let's do it.
Okay. I feel so much pressure right now because I feel like you're going to be like, this isn't a very good story. You need some tips here on how to pick a good story on Reddit.
No. I picked some duds. It's okay.
Okay, well, feel free to tell me this is a terrible story. But am I the arsehole for throwing out my husband's dinner after he went to eat at his mum's house? First of all, have you found this story before, and is this like up and coming on a podcast episode?
I have not. This is a new one for me.
Amazing. Oh, wait, yeah, it was posted 8 hours ago. So,
Oh, okay.
am I the arsehole for throwing out my husband's dinner after he went to eat at his mum's house? My mother-in-law calls every night to ask what we're having for dinner. Then she brags about what she's cooking to make me look bad, especially if we're getting takeout. I used to care, but not anymore. But my husband would ask me to make dinner only for him to go out, eat the dinner his mum makes at her home, which is 10 minutes away, and using the "that's my favourite meal" excuse. Yesterday, I wanted to surprise my husband by cooking one of his favourite meals, and although I was busy, I took the time off of work to cook. I even went to the grocery store to get what I needed. Later, as I was setting the table, his mum called. I told him he didn't have to answer, but he did, like usual. As usual, she asked what we were having for dinner, but acted surprised that I'd cooked this meal. She then went on to tell him she'd cooked X, the meal, and told him to come over. He said, okay, which shocked me. I said, seriously? As he started dressing up, getting ready to leave, he told me, no offence, but this meal that his mum had cooked was even more of a favourite than the one I'd cooked, and grabbed his keys and left. I felt awful. I took his plate and threw it out and ate my portion. As I was about to put the plate in the dishwasher, he got home looking angry, saying his mum lied about cooking that favourite meal and used it as an excuse to force him to eat dinner with her. I was shocked, but he sat down telling me to go ahead and reheat dinner. I'm just going to repeat that. He was shocked, but he sat down telling me to go ahead and reheat dinner. I told him no dinner after he abandoned it. I threw it out. He said, what? And I told him he disrespected my time and effort and chose to go eat with his mum instead. He began yelling at me, asking if I really did that, and then called me petty and horrible. Then went upstairs saying that what I did was 100 times worse than what his mum did. I definitely feel like I let my anger and frustration get the best of me, but I really felt unbearable having to live with this for so long. By the way, I'm 26 and he's 28. To make one thing clear, and the fact that my husband only does this when it comes to food. He lived with his mum, attended community college, and loved and still loves her food and is used to it. She gave me recipes to make and I tried to do that, but he keeps switching homes just to eat what he feels like.
Not the asshole at all. I would be so frustrated if I was her. It sounds like there's not two people in their relationship. There's three. Her, him, his mom. One of my favorite like little burns I've heard is like the umbilical cord is still attached. Like he needs to cut the cord. And it's so rude. It's so disrespectful, especially just his entitlement. Like he leaves, comes back and like, oh, okay, now you can heat it up, babe. Like, no. Oh, is it too? I'm like, I don't have a lot of information, but I'm like, okay, divorce. Like this is the rest of your life. Like now imagine putting kids in the mix and like, oh my God, just no.
Oh yeah, I can just, if they're only, 26, 28. I just imagine kids in the future would be like, it wouldn't be like equality. It would be like, oh, your son's messed his nappy up. Can you go deal with that? It's like, no.
Yeah, mama's boys scare me.
Yeah, I can imagine. There was a comment on here that was quite funny. Oh no, the comment would have disappeared now because there's going to be loads more comments. Suddenly I'm appreciating how difficult your job is and that it's actually...
I screenshot the good ones. That's why like I oftentimes just like I click through screenshots. But no, this is a really good one. I'm like, I got to bring you on to read it on my episode of Mama's Boys.
Hopefully I read it out well. I mean, there was a lot of like spelling and grammar, but...
It's hard. That's like, I think another perk of editing. I make so many reading mistakes and like I've kind of started to keep them in because I'm like, I want people to get used to them because it's not all perfect, but the reading and the grammatical errors, it's a challenge sometimes.
I know what you mean though, because I think that's like everything's got to be perfect. I remember like when I recorded my first video, I'd be like, take 27, take 52, whereas now I just like blurt it all out and do it in one take and then just cut whatever's not working. But I think when I listen to podcasts and I hear mistakes and things that go wrong, I don't know if it's just because I create content, but I'm just like, yes, it's so nice to hear a mistake and things that have gone wrong because it's like, hasn't got to be perfect and it's like, it's a successful show, but it's still got mistakes and things going wrong and people slurring their words, whatever. It's brilliant.
I know. I'm getting to that point of like, okay, it doesn't have to be so perfect. I think the reviews kind of haunted me a little bit at first and got in my head where like we didn't have a filter for mouth noises. And so people's mouths make noises. You listen to the most professional podcasts like NPR, they're still clicking away. And so I would get mean reviews, not just one, like multiple, but they were like, the mouth noises. It's like ASMR, but in a bad way. And so now I'm so traumatized. I literally go through when I edit and try to cut out every single noise.
Oh, so much
if
work.
I know, if the filter doesn't get it. So we found a plugin that like the plugin automatically like takes them out, but it doesn't catch all of them. So it's letting loose a little bit and realizing it's not perfect. We're not perfect. It's going to be okay.
You could literally just make an episode of that alone, just like call it It's Not Perfect or It's All Gone Wrong, and it's just literally offcuts and outtakes of all the things you guys do that go wrong and make a mistake, and then that will still be like, I think that'll still be a great hit of an episode and quite funny.
Yeah, we have a lot of them.
But yeah, otherwise, thank you so much, Morgan. This has been incredible, and it's been really surreal and bizarre to have a podcast you listen to and then just message the host and be like, do you want to come on podcast? And they say yes. So it's been incredible, an amazing experience. So thank you so much for giving me your time.
Thank you so much for having me. This has honestly made my night, maybe even more than yours. And I'm like looking at the clock right now and I'm like, oh my gosh, I feel terrible for keeping you up so late.
Oh wow, it's like 1:45. Yeah, I'm very much an early bird. I'm normally in bed by like 10.
Oh my gosh, yeah, see, I'm nocturnal.
Oh no, I'm like up at 6 o'clock or whatever, 6:30, and then go to bed at 10.
Oh my God, nope. But thank you for having me. This has been amazing.
There we go. It's been an incredible conversation, and this has become my favourite part of podcasting, just the fact that you can reach out to these people. I'm reaching out to people that inspire me, motivate me, and it just means that I get to have these incredible conversations regardless of where someone is, with the fact, especially when you're like talking to content creators, they have professional mics, professional cameras, better setups than me, so it becomes such a great conversation, and we have this great connection because it's not ever as good as real life, but there's still huge amounts of value to take from it, even though it's over Zoom. And I do look forward to hopefully having a future where, not hopefully, I definitely will have a future where I can travel the world and spend time in different cities to actually meet these people face to face, as well as other great people to interview them. I feel weird calling it an interview because it's more just like a conversation, but to have more great people on the podcast. So I really hope you've enjoyed the episode. If you have, make sure to drop a like and let me know in the comments below what you thought. And of course, subscribe to the channel because it does so much to help out and I really appreciate it. So I'll see you in the next episode. But of course, make sure to check out the channel for other short snippet videos that I do, as well as Elon Musk tweets of the week. And when I finally get my Model 3, I'll be doing a bunch of Tesla videos as well to let you know the ins and outs of owning a Tesla. So until then, bye.